Okay, thank you. Very good, everyone. Dear participants, welcome in the 3-month part-time certificate course, Fundamental of Social Design under the SPAR project. Myself, Manish Arora, faculty member, Department of Applied Art, Faculty of Visual Art, Banaras Hindu University. This course is running in association with Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, Baltimore, and Michigan State University, Michigan, USA. Now with us again, Dr. Koumudi Patil from Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur. Ma'am, very welcome to you. And ma'am will present today's lecture. It's the second lecture, and third lecture will be on tomorrow, same time. And this lecture will cover design theories of Victor Papanik, C.K. Prahlad, and Herbert Simon from a social design perspective. It will introduce students to social design vocabulary related to responsible design bottom of the pyramid and satisfying amongst others. Thank you, ma'am, for this input, and I am requesting you to please start your session as per schedule.
Thank you so much, Professor Arora. Very good evening to everybody. We will have today's session, as Professor Arora said, on basically three theorists, Victor Papanik, Herbert Simon, and Prahlad and Hart. I'm referring to their books and research works in order to create this particular lecture. It's largely based on what they have said, but I have also tried to pick up only those aspects of their research which are related to design and kept the other aspects out so that we are, the scope of the work remains social design. I'll be open to questions and answers post the lecture. Is the screen visible?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. In this lecture, I will be discussing the social design theories of three design researchers, Papanik, Prahlad and Hart, and Simon. The lecture is based on the books and papers written by these three authors, with the help of which I'll be examining the relationship of their theory with social design. The first section of this lecture is based on the work of Papanik and his theory, Design for the Real World. The content of this lecture is, of course, based on the works of Papanik himself, for which I will largely be referring to two of his books. The first one is Design for the Real World. It was published in 1971. And there was a sequel to this book called Design for the Human Scale. I will be referring to both these books to illustrate his perspective on design. Victor Papanik was an Austrian-born American designer and educator. He strongly advocated designers to be socially and ecologically responsible for the designs they produced through his influential book, Design for the Real World. There was also a sequel of this book called Design for the Human Scale, which also proposed ways in which designers can design for the real world. The entire theory of Papanik is based on the premise that designers are a dangerous breed. They are dangerous because they have put murder on a mass production basis. He believes that they have designed objects that bring in murder, that are criminally unsafe because they kill or maim, for example, automobiles. That they've created a whole new species of permanent garbage to clutter up the landscape, for example, the packaging that we design. Or by choosing materials and processes that pollute the air we breathe. He puts the blame on the designers and calls them a dangerous breed. To Papanik, the social and ecological good were not separate. He considered these two entities to be codependent. He said, the designer bears a responsibility for the way the products he designs are received at the marketplace. But more than that, his social and moral judgment must be brought into play before he begins to design. Since he, that is the designer, has to make a judgment, and an a priori judgment in that. Now, what is this judgment about? He says that this judgment is about whether the product he's asked to design or redesign merits his attention at all. In other words, will his design be on the side of the social good or not? Papanik admits that while the reasons for our poisoned air and polluted streams and lakes are fairly complex, industrial designers and the industry in general are certainly co responsible for this appalling state of affairs in which we are. The designer, the planner, they all share the responsibility for nearly all our products and tools, and hence, therefore, to all our environmental mistakes. These designers are responsible through bad design or by default by having thrown away their responsibly creative abilities, by not getting involved, or by muddling through. So, what is he referring to when he says that designers should design for the real world? Because these designers have become a dangerous breed. If this danger has to be somewhere circumvented, then Papanik says the designers need to behave responsibly, that they need to design for the real world. But what is the real world? How should we design for the real world? There are largely three takeaways for designers and engineers from the perspective that Papanik puts forth. According to Papanek, we are all handicapped. Look at this poster. It talks about the kind of handicaps that each one of us has. He says babies are handicapped because they can't walk, they can't talk, or even hold their bodies. Teenagers have cultural blocks. They're economically handicapped. So on and so forth. He talks about the elderly and the old. He talks about just everyone, from prisoners to soldiers, and speaks about how all of us even though we have so many handicaps, the market and the design industry continues to cater to the largest group of consumers, which it considers to be normal. He says most design is carried out for well to do, middle class, middle aged people living in developed societies. Designers have neglected the handicapped, the poor, the retarded, the children, the babies, the elderly, the obese, and people in developing countries, amongst others. Much recent design has satisfied only evanescent wants and desires, while the genuine needs of man have often been neglected. The economic, psychological, spiritual, social, technological, and intellectual needs of a human being are usually more difficult and less profitable to satisfy than the carefully engineered and manipulated wants inculcated by fad and fashion and maybe advertising. Look at this diagram. This diagram is about how needs are converted into wants. In this diagram, Papanek makes columns of what people really need, what people really want, and what people are told what they need and want, and how false goals are achieved. For example, people need clean air, education, clothing, food, etc., but they also want the latest fashion, higher education, prestigious institutes at low cost, expensive sports gear, etc. But they're told that they want conveniences, lifestyles, patriotism, dream castles, etc. Advertising and propaganda helps to create false goals, which people then set out to achieve. According to Papanek, many design schools and designers work for a fantasy world when they should be looking at the real world instead. Designers need to concentrate on what people really need and not what they think they should want. Papanik was very strongly concerned about the deteriorating relationship between man and his environment. According to him, ecology and the environmental equilibrium are the basic underpinnings of all human life on Earth. There can be neither life nor human culture without it. Design is concerned with the development of products, tools, machines, artifacts, and other devices. And this activity has profound and direct influence on ecology. The design response must be positive and unifying. Design must be the bridge between human needs, culture, and ecology. So, how do we design for the real world? In his book, Design for Human Scale, Papanik proposes some guidelines for designers to design for real people in the real world with real needs. First and foremost, Papanik suggests that we broaden our constituencies. For this, he gives an example of a project that he did, a very personal one. Papanik's mother was an unusually short woman, about 4 feet 11 inches. This was a handicap. Remember, he spoke about the fact that we are all handicapped in some or the other way. Well, he begins with the handicap of his mother being an unusually short woman. This was a handicap because it restricted her from doing several chores of daily life. A simple task like washing dishes was difficult because the sink was placed too high for her. The firm at which Papanik worked refused to look into the issues of short people like Papanik's mother because they did not find it profitable to work for such a small market segment. So Papanik went to his professor, who recommended that he make a list. Papanik started with the assumption that his mother was not a unique person, that there were other women who were also 4 feet 11 inches tall. He did not know where to get hard facts, so he started guessing. If his mother was that short, he estimated that there were probably at least 100,000 other little old ladies in North America. His guess was eventually wrong. There were far more number than this, but let's go ahead with his guess. So he guesses that there might be 100,000 other women like his mother. If there were really 100,000 little old ladies, then it stood for reason that there were 100,000 little old men too. He now had 200,000 short people. He asked, were there any more? World War II had ended less than 4 years earlier. Hunger and near starvation were widespread in Europe and Asia during this time. Decent nutrition, minerals, and vitamins were lacking in most parts of the world. Using population statistics related to human stature of that period, Papanik realized that there were remarkably few exceptions. Nearly the entire population of Asia, Africa, South and Central America, the Middle East, Mexico, the Pacific Islands, and even Southern Europe were short and could be added to his list. He now had more number of people. Were there any more? All of us are between 4 and 5 feet tall at some point of time in our life, maybe between our 9th and 18th birthday. And this number of children in the world could also be added to the 200,000 little people that he had found in USA. All in all, he was talking about more than 250 lakh people in the world who were short. Of course, he could continue in this manner and also speak of people with wheelchair who would also be shorter. Before looking at the design results, he tried to analyze what had been done for them, or what is it that he was doing. He was basically looking at a population for whom nobody had really catered. But by refusing to look at an artificial or narrow definition of the needs of the group, which was too small, you see, his mother was too small a population. He tried to examine ways in which this group differed from normal people and tried to become inclusive of several others who did not fit the normal tendency. He broadened the constituency that could be helped through the design intervention so that his firm, which had refused to look at the problems of his mother, could have seen a profit oriented marketing concern that would be paid attention to. The next step he took was more of a creative leap. He tried to see if the same problem or a similar problem had been solved at some other time or in some other culture. He found Japan as an example. The Japanese, for their own comfort, as well as to keep their tatami floor mats in their homes clean, wear canvas sock-like slippers which they call tabi. These tabi separate the big toe from the rest of the foot. When leaving the house, foot and tabi are slipped into wooden tongue sandals called geta. Geta come in many different heights, from 5 to 25 centimeters. They keep the feet from touching mud or snow. With this information, it was possible for Papanik to develop geta-like footwear that were immediately helpful to his mother. By developing a clamp-on or a step-in device that raised the user's height by 9 to 24 inches, many chores were simplified for the short people. It might be possible to paint the upper parts of the wall and ceilings, harvest fruit, or do many other tricky jobs when these short people were given a little more height. To sum up, broadening the constituency is to look out for other users from other domains who share similar concerns as your targeted user to increase the reach of your product. Broaden the user group until it becomes a mass. A production and profit will follow this mass. Don't give up on a user segment only because it is small. Marginalizing users is not a design solution. Including others into the marginalized segment and converting the marginalized segment into a mass is the design solution. The second guideline Papanik gives is that of design participation. The traditional design process experienced by Papanik while he was in the design industry began with the design and ended with people. The flow was a single sequential arc. It began moving from design and ended with the impact of the design on users or people. Here, users were passive consumers who took what was given to them by the industry. The industry decided what people needed and should consume. Papanik was dissatisfied with the sequence of events in the design process. Papanik proposed an alternative to the sequence. His diagram of a design process is a spiral. It begins with people and curves like a helix through all the sections, repeating its motion continually. Instead of one single turn, The helix repeats itself again and again. It gathers more and more feedback from the users. He intentionally kept some spokes empty so that in future new directions of design could be accommodated. The idea of design participation was not new. In fact, Papanik himself admitted that industrial design and product development teams have involved sales managers, buyers, marketing executives, analysts, production engineers, and controllers for long. The concept of a design team was nearly as old as the profession itself. Ideally, a design team should include people from all of the disciplines needed to solve the specific design problem. The team for designing a child's high chair, for instance, should include furniture makers, pediatricians, child psychologists, babies, and mothers, in addition to a product designer who's also well versed in materials and processes. According to Papanek, a design team is not broad enough if it is merely interdisciplinary. It must also include some of the eventual end users, a thought that will certainly come into vogue in, in decades that is soon to come. Papanek says that the West lives in the world of plenty. In fact, he calls it surplus junk. He says consumers by now are well trained to buy stuff they don't need, with money they don't have, to impress those who don't care about them. This, Papanek says, is a world of excess. The use and throw culture may have increased conveniences, but we are paying a very heavy cost for it in terms of our environment. Because people, that is, the consumers, have been trained, wooed, cajoled, threatened, irritated, and subliminally manipulated into becoming product addicts, Papanik says that it makes sense to many designers to use their training to satisfy these spurious needs generated by a hardcore, hard sell advertising agency. But designers do have an alternative. They can decide what they want to design and why. Since many of these choices are situational and existential, this is far from easy. There are no guidelines, no simple answer. There are no easy choices. Many young designers, according to Papanek, are driven by financial needs to grind out the superfluous junk. Others, not as harried economically, choose the option of not designing altogether. Choosing the option of not designing altogether may make sense, but it's a very difficult decision. It's a new direction. It has no signposts and very few precedents. Obviously, few designers will choose the socially rewarding but financially precarious option. Papanek also proposes simplification as a guideline to design for the real world. He speaks of simplification which leads to elegance, simplification that implies common sense, a quality that he said was getting rarer as the world becomes more bureaucratized. Elegance is a word that he uses in order to mean that a problem has been solved directly, unself consciously, with minimal effort, and in such a way that the object or product can be understood easily and is a good fit with its environment. He believes that several years ago, that is in pre modern times, the technological function of products was visible and could be easily understood. The design of a tool, artifact, or device, much like the design of a home or a book, followed rules that were easy to understand by the designer as well as the user. He laid out several guidelines that designers have followed in the past. In the past, designers followed the rules to show how a tool was used and what it was used for. The finished product would express the materials, tools, and processes used in its manufacture. The product, object, or artifact would work well with a minimum of repair or maintenance. The design object would meet the expectation of the end users. Most things will be made at the direct request of the people to fulfill a specific need or want. This cannot be held true for several designs or objects that are made in the world today. Papanik said that a design is to be ecologically responsible and socially responsive. It must be revolutionary and radical in the truest sense. Design must dedicate itself to nature's principle of least effort. In other words, he was saying that design required maximum diversity with minimum inventory, or doing the most with the least. This meant consuming less, using things longer, being frugal, recycling materials. The insights, the broad, non-specialized, interactive overview of a team that designers can bring to the world must now be combined with a sense of social responsibility. Papanik said that in many areas, designers must learn how to redesign. In this way, we may yet have survived through design. According to Papanik, humanization of design is probably the single most important task facing designers and architects today. He asks us to remember that needs arise from people, not from the heads of designers or from corporate decision makers. When the wrong problems are set, the wrong solutions emerge. There is an anecdote of Professor Anil Gupta, who went out on one of his Shodh Yatras to explain to the farmers how pesticides should be made. A day-long workshop was conducted in order to teach the illiterate farmers how to make pesticide. The process was complex, involved several chemicals, and long efforts and strife in order to make the pesticide. The farmers sat down through the whole workshop the entire day and listened to the team that Anil Gupta had brought forth in order to teach them how to make pesticides. At the end of the day, some of the farmers got up and said, "What you're essentially teaching us, sir, is that whichever or whatever kind of grass the cow does not eat can be taken, boiled in water, and put into our land in order to make a pesticide." This formula of making a pesticide had never occurred to the engineers and the biotechnologists whom Anil Gupta had brought in order to teach the illiterate farmers how to make pesticide. This simplification, this sensitivity towards the context in which the farmers were living, this minimal intervention, this possibility of a sturdy common sense is what Papanik says is humanization of design. The humanization of design implies examining the original design brief and then listing all of the necessary or desirable aspects that are lacking. Design analysis helps to restate the brief and provide specific goals and directions of the design. For humanization, Papanik again emphasizes minimal design intervention. He speaks about frugality, modesty, sensitivity, close cooperation with users and workers. Lastly, Papanik speaks of decentralization. He says that in order to cater to the design of real needs of real people, decentralization is important. In a world that is both energy starved and resource poor, many technological inventions work best, according to Papanik, on a decentralized level. Solar power, windmills, building insulation, and many other things have not prospered and may even have suffered because they were not decentralized. The thinking and the technology are there, but because both hardware and software work best when used at a personal level by individual households, the power companies are not interested in disseminating the technological inventions that are actually bringing man to the idea of progress, of sustainability. For these reasons, the arguments against centralization are compelling in architecture, urban planning, and design. We can make a strong case for decentralization in terms of large systems and structures, as well as in terms of human use and social accounting. Of course, smaller, more manageable structures are both productive and admirable, according to Papanik. And here he goes back to Schumacher and his argument about small being beautiful. Papanik gives the example of automotives that have been mass produced. He believes that the production of automotives itself should have been decentralized. He doesn't find much sense in the mass production when you consider the macro environment in which the car is actually going to be used. He speaks of a number of failures that mass production of cars has led to. He speaks about the leathered dashboards that buckle, that crack and peel and deform or melt in cars that are driven in hot climates of the southwestern United States, Australia, or southern Italy. He speaks of the drastic changes between day and nighttime temperatures that have caused some early automatic fuel injection systems to go berserk. These technological flaws or failures could have been prevented if design was decentralized. To sum up, Papanik believes that if you have to design for the real needs of real people, you need to design for human scale. You need to design such that you broaden the constituencies. You need to design such that you expand design participation. You need to design for simplification, for decentralization, and for humanization. Now we discuss the second theory, the theory of the bottom of the pyramid, and how the fortune lies in its bottom. This theory was proposed by C.K. Prahlad and Stuart Hart in 2004. C.K. Prahlad was a corporate and social strategist, educator, and author. He was a distinguished university professor of corporate strategy at the University of Michigan. Stuart Hart is an American academic, writer, and theorist. Hart is one of the world's leading authorities on the implications of sustainable development and environmentalism relative to business strategy. Dr. Paul Pollack, in his book Out of Poverty, raises a very pertinent question about designers and their responsibility and relevance to society. He questions why the majority of the world's designers focus all their efforts on developing products and services exclusively for the richest 10% of the world's consumers. Nothing less than a revolution in design is needed to reach the other 90%, according to Pollack. This also is the premise of the book, Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. In this book, Prahlad and Hart say that the real source of market promise is not the wealthy few in the developing world or even the emerging middle income consumers. The real source of market promise is the billions of aspiring poor who are joining the market economy for the first time. But do we know this user and market segment? At the very top of the world economic pyramid are 75 to 100 million affluent Tier 1 consumers from around the world. This is a cosmopolitan group composed of middle and upper income people in developed countries and few rich elites from the developed world. In the middle of the pyramid, in Tier 2 and 3, are poor customers from developed nations and the rising middle classes in developing countries, the targets of MNC's past emerging market strategies. It is with the middle class that the post-World War II economic boom was spearheaded. Now, look at the bottom of the pyramid. There are 4 billion people in Tier 4 at the bottom of the pyramid. For well over a billion people, roughly 1/6 of humanity, per capita income is less than $1 per day. According to World Bank projections, the population at the bottom of the pyramid could swell to more than 6 billion people over the next 40 years, because the bulk of the world's population growth occurs there. Contrast this with Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon. Jeff Bezos makes around $321 million per day, or $3,715 per second. According to the United Nations, the richest 20% in the world accounted for about 70% of the total income in 1960. In 2000, that figure reached 85%. This extreme inequity of wealth distribution reinforces the view that the poor cannot participate in the global market economy, even though they constitute the majority of the population. In fact, given its vast size, Tier 4 represents a multi-trillion dollar rural villages or urban slums, and they usually do not hold legal titles or deeds to their assets in India. For instance, Ghali in Mumbai. In fact, some Tier 4 people are migrants or are nomads in search of work, therefore have no assets at all. The Charas of Ahmedabad sing a beautiful move around are still available for sees assume the bottom is not important to the long-term viability of the business. Governments and markets
Okay. Apologize for the technical reason, ma'am. Network because of the network issue from the side of guest speaker. We will wait for the next some minutes, and ma'am will again connect with you. Apologize for delay, students. Hopefully, we will connect it soon. Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me? Hello? Yeah, you can hear me? Okay. So can you tell me which slide I need to start with? Because I don't know when I lost the connection.
Just wait a moment. Ankit, please help to ma'am.
Start with because I don't know when I lost the connection.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Ankit will share you. Ankit, please help,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Oh my God, तब से ओए रब्बा अच्छा ओके अच्छा ठीक है हाँ 1 मिनट रुकिए He questions why the majority of sustainable world's status of question about designers and their responsibility and relevance to society. He questions why the majority of the world's designers focus all their efforts on developing products and services exclusively for the richest 10% of the world's consumers. Nothing less than a revolution in design is needed to reach the other 90%, according to Pollack. This also is the premise of the book, Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid. In this book, Prahlad and Hart say that the real source of market promise is not the wealthy few in the developing world or even the emerging middle income consumers. The real source of market promise is the billions of aspiring poor who are joining the market economy for the first time. But do we know this user and market segment at all? Prahlad argues that the poorest populations face a prodigious new managerial challenge for the world's wealthiest companies. Selling to the poor and helping them improve their lives by producing and distributing products and services in culturally sensitive, environmentally sustainable, and economically profitable ways is not easy. It's a challenge. He says that doing business with the world's 4 billion poorest people, they constitute the 2/3 of the world's population, will require radical innovations in technology and business models. It will require MNCs to reevaluate price performance relationships for products and services. It will demand a new level of capital efficiency and new ways of measuring financial success. Most importantly, companies will be forced to transform their understanding of scale from a bigger is better ideal to an ideal of highly distributed, small scale operations married to world scale capabilities. At the very top of the world economic pyramid are 75 to 100 million affluent Tier 1 consumers from around the world. This is a cosmopolitan group composed of middle and upper income people in developed countries and few rich elites from the developed world. In the middle of the pyramid, in tier 2 and 3, are poor customers from developed nations and the rising middle classes in developing countries, the targets of MNC's past emerging market strategies. It is with the middle class that the post-World War II economic boom was spearheaded. Now, look at the bottom of the pyramid. There are 4 billion people in tier 4 at the bottom of the pyramid. For well over a billion, roughly 1/6 of humanity, per capita income is less than $1 per day. According to World Bank projections, the population at the bottom of the pyramid could swell to more than 6 billion people over the next 40 years, because the bulk of the world's population growth occurs there. Contrast this with Jeff Bezos, the owner. Jeff Bezos makes around $321 million per day, or $3,715 per second. According to the United Nations, the richest 20% in the world accounted for about 70% of the total income in 1960. In 2000, that figure reached 85%. This extreme inequity of wealth distribution reinforces the view that the poor cannot participate in the global market economy, even though they constitute the majority of the population. In fact, given its vast size, tier 4 represents a multi-trillion economy. Despite its mammoth size, largely the perception is that the bottom of the pyramid is not a viable market. This perception fails to take into account the growing importance of the informal economy among the poorest of the poor, which by some estimates accounts for 90% of all economic activities in India. Most tier 4 people live in rural villages or urban slums, and they usually do not hold legal titles or deeds to their assets in India. For instance, Dharavi in Mumbai. In fact, some tier 4 people are migrants or are nomads in search of work, therefore have no assets at all. The Charas of Ahmedabad sing a beautiful song as they move around in the past. They said, "We have nothing but a house that a donkey carries around." The house, of course, was just a makeshift tent, which was loaded on the donkey as they moved from place to place. Tier 4 people have little or no formal education and are hard to reach via conventional distribution, credit, and communication system. MNCs have refused to look at the sector perceived to be unviable. Therefore, the quality and quantity of products and services available in tier 4 is generally low. Despite its massive market opportunities, the bottom of the pyramid has remained largely invisible to the corporate sector. To appreciate the potential of tier 4 consumers, MNCs must come to terms with a set of 4 assumptions and practices that color their view. Prahlad and Hart have identified several misconceptions of the market regarding the tier 4 customers, which they stress must be re-examined. They speak of the first assumption that the poor are not the target consumers of MNCs because with their current cost structures, MNCs cannot profitably compete for that market. The second assumption is that the MNCs assume that the poor cannot afford and have no use for the products and services sold in developed markets. The third assumption is that the MNCs assume that only developed markets appreciate and will pay for new technology. Obsolete technologies are still viable for the poor consumers. Fourthly, the MNCs assume that the bottom of the pyramid is not important to the long-term viability of their business. Governments and non-profits can take responsibility of tier 4. MNCs can look after the developed world. Fifthly, the MNCs assume that managers are not excited by business challenges that have a humanitarian dimension. Consider the drivers of innovation and opportunities for companies in Tier 4 in this table proposed by Prahlad and Hart. Increased access to TV, internet, and information is making the consumers in Tier 4 aware of more products and raising their aspirations. Several developing countries have deregularized with minimal government interference, driving the market towards a more hospitable reception of MNCs. There is intense competition in Tier 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, the window of opportunity lies in Tier 4. Also, due to mass migration from rural to urban areas in search of a livelihood, can be checked only by providing a meaningful alternative to Tier 4 within their natural context. With this as the background, Prahlad and Hart discuss several reasons to support consumers in Tier 4 or in the bottom of the pyramid. Prahlad and Hart argue that MNCs can be leaders in leapfrogging to products that don't repeat the environmental mistakes of developed countries over the last 50 years. Today's MNCs evolved in an era of abundant natural resources and thus tended to make products and services that were resource intensive and excessively polluting. The United States, 270 million people, only about 4% of the world's population, consume more than 25% of the planet's energy resources. To recreate those types of consumption patterns in developing countries would be disastrous. For example, Unilever's HLL subsidiary has tackled the lack of practical, inexpensive, low-energy consuming refrigeration in India. HLL's laboratories developed a radically different approach to refrigeration that allows ice cream to be transported across the country in standard, non-refrigerated trucks. The system allows quantum reductions in electricity use and makes dangerous and polluting refrigerants unnecessary. As a bonus, the new system is cheaper to build and use. The disenfranchised in Tier 4 can disrupt the way of life and safety of the rich in Tier 1. After all, poverty breeds discontent and extremism. Therefore, in order to maintain law and order and reduce inequality in the world population, it is important for MNCs to bring up the standard of living of the Tier 4 consumers. The real source of market promise is not the wealthy few in the developing world or even the emerging middle-income consumers. Prahlad and Hart argue that it is the billions of aspiring poor who are joining the market economy for the first time that make the fortune for the MNCs. For companies with the resources and persistence to compete at the bottom of the world economic pyramid, the prospective rewards include growth, profits, and incalculable contributions to humankind. Electricity, water, refrigeration, and many other essential services are all opportunities in developing countries. A US-based NGO, the Solar Electric Light Fund, or SELF, has creatively adopted technology and applied microcredit financing to bring electrical service to people in remote villages in Africa and Asia, who otherwise would spend money to burn hazardous kerosene, candles, wood, or dung for their light and cooking. SELF's rural electrification system is based on small-scale, on-site power generation using renewable resources. A revolving loan fund gives villagers the financial means to operate these electrical systems themselves, but they also create jobs. This is a win-win situation for the developing as well as the developed world. MNCs must recognize that this market poses a major new challenge. How do we combine low cost, good quality, sustainability, and profitability? According to the International Labour Organization's 2001 report, nearly 1 billion people That is, about 1/3 of the world's workforce are either underemployed or they have such low paying jobs that they cannot support themselves or their families. To help elevate world's poor effectively, Prahlad and Hart speak about two interventions. One, providing access to credit, and two, increasing the earning potential of the poor. Commercial credit historically has been unavailable to the very poor. Even if those living in poverty had access to a bank, without a collateral, it is hard to get credit from the traditional banking system. In 1976, Professor Mohammad Yunus at University of Chittagong launched a research project to study how to design a credit delivery system to provide banking services to the rural poor. Of course, this banking service had to be provided without a collateral. Thus, Grameen Bank was born. Grameen Bank is a community development bank founded in Bangladesh by Professor Yunus. It makes small loans, which we today call microcredit or Grameen credit, to the impoverished without requiring collateral. As of January 2011, the total borrowers of the bank numbered around 8.4 million. 97% of this borrowing population was women. In 2006, the bank and its founder, Mohammad Yunus, were jointly awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. During a visit to one of the tribal villages in Dhar district in Madhya Pradesh, we had informal conversations on what they thought, that is, what the tribals thought, would improve their standard of life. Amongst the several demands that the tribals had, they wanted their children to be educated in English and not in the local Bhil language. They wanted their children to eat Maggi and look like the white babies that come in lactogen advertisements. They wanted Mary biscuits for their children. These are aspirations of the rural towards the urban. In fact, sometimes the Western urban. Not all these choices were sustainable or healthy for the tribals. According to Prahlad and Hart, sustainable product innovations initiated in Tier 4 and promoted through consumer education will positively influence the choices of people at the bottom of the pyramid also. In fact, it can also come a full circle and may ultimately reshape the way consumers in Tier 1 live. Prahlad and Hart were optimistic that in future we may look back to see that Tier 4 provided the early market pull for disruptive technologies that replaced unsustainable technologies in developed countries. This would, of course, advance the fortunes of MNCs with foresight. Introduced in
Excuse me, Koumudi ma'am, your voice is not clear from the more than last 10 minutes. Hello? 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 Ma'am, your voice is not clear from the last three slides. Koumudi ma'am? Koumudi ma'am? Excuse me?
Hello, 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 ma'am, Koumudi ma'am, Koumudi ma'am,
Yes.
your voice is not clear from the last 10 minutes.
Hello.
Hello,
Yeah.
ma'am, you are not audible properly from the last 10 minutes.
My God. Is it okay now?
Is it okay right now?
Okay, fine. 10 minutes. Can you tell me which slide?
The before two slides, these type of last two slides. Right now, local is the case presented.
Equitable
Absolutely
distribution.
right. Yeah. After the this slide, from this slide.
Equitable distribution. Okay.
Yeah. Right now it's audible. Yeah.
Because Tier 4 communities are often physically and economically isolated, better distribution systems and communication links are essential to the development of the bottom of the pyramid. Few of the large emerging market countries have distribution systems that reach more than half of the population. However, the few MNCs that have designed their distribution systems to cater to the needs of poor rural customers have seen a jump in their profit margins. In India, for instance, Urban Mills has introduced an entirely new delivery system for blue jeans. Urban Mills is the world's fifth largest denim manufacturer. But the mills found that the Indian domestic denim sales was very limited. And that's largely because they were positioned at a fairly high price. At $40 to $60 a pair, the jeans was not affordable to the Indian masses. And the existing distribution system reached only a few towns and villages. So Urban Mills introduced a new line of jeans, rough and tough jeans. This was a ready-to-make kit of jeans components, denim, zipper, rivets, and a patch. They were all priced together into a small kit of $6. These kits were distributed through a network of thousands of local tailors, many in small rural towns and villages, whose self-interest motivated them to market the kits extensively. Rough and tough jeans are now the largest selling jeans in India, easily surpassing Levi's and other brands from the US and Europe. HUL's Shakti scheme is also a beautiful example of low-cost, localized distribution system. Information poverty may be the single biggest roadblock to sustainable development. More than half of humanity has yet to make a single phone call. Sam Petroda came to India with the idea of rural telephones. His original concept was to have a community telephone operated by an entrepreneur, who was usually a woman, who charged a fee for the use of the telephone and kept a percentage as wages for maintaining the telephone. Today, from most parts of India, it is possible to call anyone in the world. Other entrepreneurs have introduced fax services, and some are experimenting with low-cost email and internet access. These communication links have dramatically altered the way villages function and how they are connected to the rest of the country and the world. With the emergence of global broadband connections, opportunities for information-based business in Tier 4 will expand significantly. Bringing such technology to villages in Tier 4 makes possible a number of applications, including teleeducation, telemedicine, microbanking, agricultural extension services, environmental monitoring, etc. All of these, in turn, help to spur micro-enterprise, economic development, and access to world markets. Sam Petroda transformed the digital divide into a digital dividend. And we're certainly making the best of it in the times of COVID. Than heart, they must nurture local markets and cultures, leverage local solutions, and generate wealth at the lowest levels on the pyramid. Producing in rather than extracting wealth from developing countries will be the guiding principle to the future. To do this, MNCs must combine their advanced technology with deep local insights. Prahlad and Hart give the example of packaging to understand local behavior pattern. Consumers in Tier 1 countries have the disposable income and the space to buy in bulk. Therefore, they also shop less frequently. They are able to build an inventory at their convenience. On the other hand, Tier 4 consumers are strapped for cash, have limited living space, shop every day, but not for large amounts. They can't afford to stock up on household items or be highly selective about what they buy. They look for single-serve packaging. Do you realize what this means for the poor? In 2016, a 1 liter pouch of milk costed rupees 39, while a 200 milliliter small pouch of milk was priced at rupees 10 in the Indian market. Tier 4 customer purchases the 200 ml pack, not the 1 liter pouch. This means that the Tier 4 customers are paying 80 rupees per liter of milk. This is almost double the amount that Tier 1 is paying for 1 liter of milk. Then where is the profit? In Tier 4 or in Tier 1? Of course, this will also raise the question of whom is it that you are making the profit on? The ones who can afford in the Tier 1 or the ones who cannot afford milk in the Tier 4? Already in India, 30% of personal care products and other consumables, such as shampoo, tea, cold medicines, are sold in single-serve packages. Most are served at rupees 1, that is about 1 cent. And the targeted customer is that of Tier 4. Without innovation in packaging, however, this trend could result in a mountain of solid waste. In fact, it has already created a mountain of solid waste. Already, companies are experimenting with organic plastic that would be totally biodegradable. Such packaging clearly has advantages in Tier 4, but it could also revolutionize markets at all 4 tiers of the world pyramid. For MNCs, the best approach is to marry local capabilities and market knowledge with global best practices. New business models must not disrupt the cultures and lifestyles of local people. An effective combination of local and global knowledge is needed, not a replication of the Western system. The development of India's milk industry has many lessons for MNCs. The transformation began around 1946 when the Khira District Milk Cooperative, located in the state of Gujarat, set up its own processing plant under the leadership of Verghese Kurian. Kurian created the brand Amul, which is today one of the most recognized in the country. Unlike the large industrial dairy farms of the West, in India, milk originates in small villages. Villagers may own only 2 to 3 buffaloes or cows each and bring their milk twice a day to the village collection center. In the Korean model, these villagers are paid every day for the milk they deliver, based on fat content and volume. Refrigerated vans transport the milk to central processing plants where it is pasteurized. Railroad cars then transport the milk to major urban centers. The entire value chain is carefully managed from the village-based milk production to the world-scale processing facilities. The Khera District Cooperative provides such services to the farmers as veterinary care and cattle feed. The cooperative also manages the distribution of pasteurized milk, milk powder, butter, cheese, baby food, and other products. The uniqueness of the Amul cooperative is its blending of decentralized origination with the efficiencies of a modern processing and distribution infrastructure. As a result, previously marginal village farmers are earning steady incomes and being transformed into active market participants. Tier 4 is a testing ground for sustainable living. Many of the innovations for the bottom of the pyramid can be adapted for use in the resource and energy-intensive markets of the developed world. It is imperative, however, that managers recognize the nature of business leadership required in the Tier 4 arena. Creativity, imagination, tolerance for ambiguity, stamina, passion, empathy, and courage may be as important as analytical skill, intelligence, and knowledge, according to Prahlad and Hart. Leaders need a deep understanding of the complexities and subtleties of sustainable development in the context of Tier 4. Finally, Prahlad and Hart state that managers must have the interpersonal and intercultural skills to work with a wide range of organizations and people. To sum up the view of Prahlad and Hart, doing business with the world's 4 billion poorest people, 2/3 of the world's population, will require radical innovations in technology and business models. Companies will be forced to transform their understanding of scale from a bigger is better ideal to an ideal of highly distributed, small-scale operations married to world-scale capabilities. Now let us look at the theory of Herbert Simon, who proposes that design is the science of the artificial. Herbert Simon was an American economist and cognitive psychologist who wrote extensively on decision-making. He is best known for the theories of bounded rationality and satisficing. He received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1978 and the Turing Award in 1975. We will be referring specifically to his book, Sciences of the Artificial, which he published in 1969. Though his book covers several aspects of decision-making, including simulations, I will be concentrating on his views related to design alone. During the 1950s and 60s, several scholars attempted to establish design as a science, rather than as an art or craft, which requires as much rigor as any other empirical science. Their vociferous arguments would bring about the design methods movement of the 1960s. This movement proposed systematic and formulaic ways of solving design problems using pattern language and simulations, amongst others. Simon wrote his book on the artificial sciences with design methods movement as the backdrop. Under this, Simon argued for a science of design as a body of intellectually tough, analytic, partly formalizable, partly empirical, teachable doctrine about the design process. In order to speak of the artificial, Simon first makes a distinction between artificial and natural. According to Simon, natural science is knowledge about natural objects and phenomena. A natural science is a body of knowledge about some class of things, objects, or phenomena in the world, about the characteristics and properties that they have, about how they behave and interact with each other. The central task of a natural science is to find pattern hidden in apparent chaos. The term artificial is used by Simon in a very specific sense. He uses the term to denote systems that have a given form and behavior only because they adapt or are adapted in reference to goals or purposes and to their environment. Therefore, the definition of artificial is not only inclusive of all man-made artifacts, but also the behavior of man which adapts to the environment or the context. This brings the definition of artificial very close to that of synthesis, which Simon claims is the practice of engineers. The engineer, and more generally the designer, is concerned with how things ought to be in order to attain goals. Science, on the other hand, is concerned with analysis. Therefore, science of the artificial concerns itself with normative and not descriptive analysis of the phenomenon. Simon identifies 4 indicators that distinguish the artificial from the natural. Hence, we can set the boundaries for sciences of the artificial in the following ways. 1. Artificial things are synthesized by human beings. Artificial things may imitate appearances in natural things while lacking in one or many respects the reality of the latter. Artificial things can be characterized in terms of functions, goals, adaptation. Artificial things are often discussed, particularly when they are being designed in terms of imperatives as well as descriptives. Artificial sciences, such as design, are concerned with how things ought to be. On the other hand, the natural sciences are concerned with how things are. Simon characterizes an artificial system as an interface between 2 environments, inner environment and outer environment. These environments lie in the province of natural science, but the interface linking them is the realm of artificial science. When an artificial science or system adapts successfully, its behavior shows mostly the shape of the outer environment and reveals little of the structure or mechanisms of the inner. The inner environment becomes significant for behavior only when a system reaches the limits of its rationality and adaptability, and contingency degenerates into necessity. Therefore, the first advantage of dividing outer from inner environment in studying an adaptive or artificial system is that we can often predict behavior from knowledge of the system's goals and its outer environment. This can be done with only minimal assumptions about the inner environment. To take it forward, we often find quite different inner environments accomplishing identical or similar goals in identical or similar outer environments. For instance, airplanes and birds have different inner environments but adapt to the outer environment in similar manners. Only a few characteristics of outer environment may influence success. For example, polar animals are likely to blend into a white background for safety and have hair or fat to regulate body temperature. Behavior is adapted to goals, hence is artificial. Behavior reveals only those characteristics of the behaving system that limit its adaptation. An ant viewed as a behaving system is quite simple. The apparent complexity of its behavior over time is largely a reflection of the complexity of the environment in which it finds itself. Human beings, viewed as behaving systems, are quite simple. The apparent complexity of our behavior over time is largely a reflection of the complexity of the environment in which we find ourselves. The artificial world is centered precisely on this interface between the inner and outer environments. Design is concerned with attaining goals by adapting the inner environment with the outer environment. Design theory, according to Simon, then, is a study of the way the artificial world adapts means to the environment. But designing is more complicated than just creating a specification. The design process needs to employ at least one inner system that meets the goals of the outer environment. Design often fails when the interface between the inner and the outer environment fails to adapt to each other. When designs fail, we learn more about the relations between the inner and outer environment. As Henry Petrosky would say, failure-proof design doesn't exist. Neither can you predict failure. But learning from failures prepares designers to take risks. That is, failures inform designers which aspect of the inner environment does not match the outer environment. This begs the question, if failure cannot be predicted, then how do we map the inner environment on the outer environment? Simon elaborates two ways in which designers can map the inner environment on the outer environment: optimization and satisficing. Decision makers can satisfice either by finding optimal solutions for a simplified world or by finding satisfactory solutions for a more realistic world. Neither approach in general dominates the other, and both have continued to coexist. In the optimization method, the inner environment of the design problem is represented by a set of given alternatives of action. The alternatives have defined domains. The outer environment is represented by a set of parameters which may be known with certainty or only in terms of a probability distribution. The goals for adaptation of inner to outer environment are defined by a utility function, and environmental parameters are supplemented by a number of constraints. The optimization problem is to find an admissible set of alternatives of actions compatible with the constraints that maximize the utility function for the given values of the environmental parameters. The optimization problem, once formalized, is a standard mathematical problem to maximize a function. It relies on standard logic of the predicate calculus on which mathematics rests. However, traditional engineering design methods make much more use of satisfactory performance than of optimal performance. So-called figures of merit permit comparison between designs in terms of better and worse, but design seldom pronounces a judgment of best. Simon says, since there did not seem to be any word in English for decision methods that look for good or satisfactory solutions instead of optimal ones, he introduced the term satisficing to refer to such procedures. Now, no one in his right mind will satisfice if he can equally well optimize. No one will settle for good or better if he can have best. But that is not the way the problem usually poses itself in actual or real-life design situations. Satisficing is a decision-making strategy that aims for a satisfactory or adequate result rather than the optimal solution. Instead of putting maximum exertion towards attaining the ideal outcome, satisficing focuses on pragmatic efforts when confronted with tasks. This is because aiming for the optimal solution may necessitate a needless expenditure of time, energy, and resources. Satisficing is a decision-making strategy or cognitive heuristic that entails searching through the available alternatives until an acceptability threshold is met. In all situations where we satisfice because we cannot optimize, the set of available alternatives are given to the designer are not always practically relevant. After all, it is not humanly possible to generate the limits of all the admissible alternatives and compare their respective pros and cons. As humans, we also cannot simply recognize the best alternative, even if we are fortunate enough to generate it early until we have seen all of them. Therefore, designers satisfice by looking for alternatives in such a way that they can generally find an acceptable one after only a moderate search. This economizes time, effort, and resources. Simon compares satisficing to even the Darwinian model of evolution. He argues that natural selection only predicts that survivors will be fit enough, that is, fitter than their losing competitors. Therefore, natural selection postulates satisficing, not optimizing. Now, in the real world, actions have consequences and sometimes are dependent on other conditions or parameters for their occurrence. Under these circumstances, one can never be certain that a partial sequence of actions that accomplishes certain goals can satisfy all the conditions, all the stakeholders, and attain all the goals of the problem. For this reason, design problem solving in the real world is not merely about assembling problem solutions from components. It is a search for appropriate assemblies or solutions. In carrying out such a search, it is often efficient to diversify the search for the solution into different paths right in the beginning. Each path should be pursued until it succeeds completely or fails definitely. Some paths may be pursued more aggressively if they seem more promising than others, while others can be given a lower priority. In such a search, a designer who is capable of identifying and exploring more number of paths has more probability of success than others. Therefore, Simon's definition of a designer is very inclusive. Everyone designs who devises courses of actions aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. This makes the creative cognition required to produce objects, material, similar to the prescription of remedies for a sick patient or strategizing a new sales plan for a company or a social welfare policy for a state. All people involved in these examples are changing existing situations into preferred ones. Therefore, in the moment in which they are the catalyst of change, they also don the robes of a designer. With this as the background, Herbert Simon proposed one of the first formal models of the design thinking process. His model is seen by many as the most typical of the design thinking models. Most later models are either its derivations or are influenced by it. Simon's model consists of 7 major stages, each with component stages and activities. The first one is understanding, second observation, third defining, fourth ideation, fifth prototyping, and sixth testing. As these stages are not always sequential, sometimes they run parallel and are repeated over the course of an iterative process. So you are not looking at a linear sequential occurrence of these stages. Hence, they are better perceived as modes than stages. Every project will involve activities specific to the product under development, but the central idea behind each stage or mode remains largely the same. In the understanding mode, designers attempt to develop a deep understanding of the problems they are trying to solve and to empathize with the end users. In the observation mode, designers with project stakeholders observe real users, employees, customers, and anyone who could be an end user. Various methods of observation are used, but generally, the design team will passively observe end users without interfering in the natural setting, something that's often called as design ethnography too. In the define mode, the information gathered from the understanding and observation mode is analyzed to refine and reframe the design problems. The refinement and reframing helps the designers to establish features, functions, and any other elements that will allow them to solve the problem. In the ideation mode, the designers generate ideas. They are encouraged to think outside the box to identify new solutions and alternative ways of viewing the problem. In the prototype mode, the design team produces a number of low-fidelity prototypes. Low-fidelity prototypes are inexpensive, scaled-down versions of the product or specific features found within the product. Prototypes might be shared and tested within the team itself or in a small user group. This is an experimental phase where the aim is to identify the most feasible solution for the problem. By the end of the stage, the design team has a more informed perspective of how real users would behave, think, and feel when interacting with the end product. In the testing phase, designers or evaluators rigorously test the high-fidelity prototype of the best solutions identified during the prototyping phase. This is the last stage of the model. But in an iterative process, the results collected from the testing phase can also be used to reframe the problem itself based on the understanding of the users and the conditions of use. One of the main benefits of Simon's model is the way knowledge acquired at each stage feeds into the earlier modes. Information is continuously used to both inform the understanding of the problem and solution spaces, and to redefine and reframe the problem itself. The problem space itself is not considered definite and static, but protean in nature. This creates a perpetual loop where the designers are continuously gaining insights, developing new ways of viewing the product and its possible uses, and gaining more empathetic understanding of the users.
Ma'am, you are not audible right now.
Yes, so I have finished the lecture for today. So are there any questions that students have?
Sorry, apologize, but still we don't receive any question from the side of participants. Hopefully, I will receive after the session, after the maybe today, or maybe they will review it and then again ask the questions.
Okay.
But
So what we can do is
thank you. Yeah, absolutely right. Thanks a lot, Dr. Koumudi, for your valuable information. And very good lecture presentation. It's a second module session. Now, I am thanking you on behalf of Department of Applied Art, Faculty of Visual Art, Banaras Hindu University, and Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, in association with Michigan State University, Michigan, USA. Thank you, participants, for your valuable time, and thank you, ma'am, for your valuable time. We will again meet on Sunday, 4 p.m., same time. Thank you, participants.
Sure. Thank you so much, everyone.